Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and Senior English. And we are now at the end of our study of the play Macbeth. And we're going to turn now in our textbook to pages 385, 386 and following. And we're going to look at two pieces of what is called literary criticism. The first of these two is Clint Brooks's From the Naked Babe and the Cloak of Manliness from the Well-Wrought Urn. Now let's introduce ourselves to Brooks for a few moments on page 385. His dates, 1906 to 1994. Born in Kentucky, Brooks is perhaps best known for helping, through his literary criticism, change the way that poetry was taught in American colleges and universities. He is the author of the highly regarded works of literary criticism, including The Well-Wrought Urn and Modern Poetry and the Tradition. The background for The Naked Babe, and obviously the Naked Babe here is a reference, right, to Macbeth, the play Macbeth. The Naked Babe and the Cloak of Manliness. Throughout his plays, William Shakespeare uses complex symbolism to explore and convey his key themes. In this piece of literary criticism from the book The Well-Wrought Urn, Clint Brooks examines the usage and development of symbolic imagery related to children and growth in the tragedy of Macbeth. Now, of course, we've spoken about this already in earlier lectures, but now we're going to look specifically at this idea as represented in, again, literary criticism. Do pay attention, of course, to the fact that we are working with a number of paragraphs here. Good writers always scan what they're reading. We have 13 paragraphs here. We'll obviously be taking annotation as we go. We will enjoy professional reader reading, and then we'll come back to make final observations. Let's focus now and work to get some good intel.
From The Naked Babe and the Cloak of Manliness. From The Well-Wrought Urn by Clint Brooks. Tempted by the weird sisters and urged on by his wife, Macbeth is caught between the irrational and the rational. There is a sense, of course, in which every man is caught between them. Man must try to predict and plan and control his destiny. That is man's fate, and the struggle, if he is to realize himself as a man, cannot be avoided. The question, of course, which has always interested the tragic dramatist, involves the terms on which the struggle is accepted and the protagonist's attitude toward fate and toward himself. Macbeth, in his general concern for the future, is typical, is every man. He becomes the typical tragic protagonist when he yields to pride and hubris. The occasion for temptation is offered by the prophecy of the weird sisters. They offer him knowledge which cannot be arrived at rationally. They offer a key, if only a partial key, to what is otherwise unpredictable. Lady Macbeth, on the other hand, by employing a ruthless clarity of perception, by discounting all emotional claims, offers him the promise of bringing about the course of events which he desires. Now, in the middle of the play, though he has not lost confidence, and though, as he himself says, there can be no turning back, doubts have begun to arise, and he returns to the weird sisters to secure unambiguous answers to his fears. But, pathetically and ironically for Macbeth, in returning to the weird sisters, he is really trying to impose rationality on what sets itself forth plainly as irrational. That is, Macbeth would force a rigid control on a future which, by definition, by the very fact that the weird sisters already know it, stands beyond his manipulation. It is because of his hopes for his own children and his fears of Banquo's that he has returned to the witches for counsel. It is altogether appropriate, therefore, that two of the apparitions by which their counsel is revealed should be babes, the crowned babe and the bloody babe. For the babe signifies the future which Macbeth would control and cannot control. It is the unpredictable thing itself. As Yeats has put it magnificently, the uncontrollable mystery on the bestial floor. It is the one thing that can justify, even in Macbeth's mind, the murders which he has committed. Earlier in the play, Macbeth had declared that if the deed could trammel up the consequence, he would be willing to jump the life to come, but he cannot jump the life to come. In his own terms, he is betrayed, for it is idle to speak of jumping the life to come if one yearns to found a line of kings. It is the babe that betrays Macbeth, his own babes most of all. The logic of Macbeth's distraught mind thus forces him to make war on children, a war which in itself reflects his desperation and is a confession of weakness. Macbeth's ruffians, for example, break into Macduff's castle and kill his wife and children. The scene in which the innocent child prattles with his mother about his absent father, and then is murdered, is typical Shakespearean fourth act pathos. But the pathos is not adventitious. The scene ties into the inner symbolism of the play. For the child, in its helplessness, defies the murderers. Its defiance testifies to the force which threatens Macbeth, and which Macbeth cannot destroy. But we are not, of course, to placard the child as the future in a rather stiff and mechanical allegory. Macbeth is no such allegory. Shakespeare's symbols are richer and more flexible than that. The babe signifies not only the future, it symbolizes all of those enlarging purposes which make life meaningful. And it symbolizes, furthermore, all those emotional and, to Lady Macbeth, irrational ties which make man more than a machine, which render him human. It signifies preeminently the pity which Macbeth, under Lady Macbeth's tutelage, would wean himself of as something unmanly. Lady Macbeth's great speeches early in the play become brilliantly ironical when we realize that Shakespeare is using the same symbol for the unpredictable future that he uses for human compassion. Lady Macbeth is willing to go to any length to grasp the future. She would willingly dash out the brains of her own child if it stood in her way to that future. But this is to repudiate the future, for the child is its symbol. Shakespeare does not, of course, limit himself to the symbolism of the child. He makes use of other symbols of growth and development, notably that of the plant. And this plant symbolism patterns itself to reflect the development of the play. For example, Banquo says to the Weird Sisters early in the play, "If you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me." A little later, on welcoming Macbeth, Duncan says to him, "I have begun to plant thee, and will labor to make thee full of growing." After the murder of Duncan, Macbeth falls into the same metaphor when he comes to resolve on Banquo's death. The Weird Sisters, he reflects, had hailed Banquo as father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown, and put a barren scepter in my grip. Late in the play, Macbeth sees himself as the winter-stricken tree. I have lived long enough, my way of life is fallen into the sear, the yellow leaf. The plant symbolism, then, supplements the child symbolism. At points it merges with it, as when Macbeth ponders bitterly that he has damned himself. To make them kings, the seed of Banquo, kings. And, in at least one brilliant example, the plant symbolism unites with the clothes symbolism. It is a crowning irony that one of the Weird Sisters' prophecies on which Macbeth has staked his hopes is fulfilled when Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane. For, in a sense, Macbeth is here hoist on his own petard. Macbeth, who has invoked night to scarf up the tender eye of pitiful day, and who has, again and again, used the false face to hide what the false heart doth know, here has the trick turned against him. But the garment which cloaks the avengers is the living green of nature itself, and nature seems, to the startled eyes of his sentinels, to be rising up against him. But it is the babe, the child, that dominates the symbolism. Most fittingly, the last of the prophecies in which Macbeth has placed his confidence concerns the child. And Macbeth comes to know the final worst when Macduff declares to him that he was not born of woman, but was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. The babe here has defied even the thing which one feels may reasonably be predicted of him, his time of birth. With Macduff's pronouncement, the unpredictable has broken through the last shred of the net of calculation. The future cannot be trembled up. The naked babe confronts Macbeth to pronounce his doom. The passage with which we began this essay, then, is an integral part of a larger context, and of a very rich context. And pity, like a naked newborn babe, striding the blast, or heaven's cherubim, poised upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the hard deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. Pity is like the naked babe, the most sensitive and helpless thing, yet almost as soon as the comparison is announced, the symbol of weakness begins to turn into a symbol of strength. For the babe, though newborn, is pictured as striding the blast, like an elemental force, like heaven's cherubim, oars upon the sightless couriers of the air. We can give an answer to the question put earlier. Is pity like the human and helpless babe, or powerful as the angel that rides the winds? It is both, and it is strong because of its very weakness. The paradox is inherent in the situation itself, and it is the paradox that will destroy the over-brittle rationalism on which Macbeth founds his career. For what will it avail Macbeth to cover the deed with the blanket of the dark, if the elemental forces that ride the winds will blow the horrid deed in every eye? And what will it avail Macbeth to clothe himself in manliness, to become bloody, bold, and resolute, if he is to find himself again and again viewing his bloody work through the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil? Certainly, the final and climactic appearance of the babe's symbol merges all the contradictory elements of the symbol. For with Macduff's statement about his birth, the naked babe rises before Macbeth as not only the future that eludes calculation, but as avenging angel as well. The clothed daggers and the naked babe, mechanism and life, instrument and end, death and birth, that which should be left bare and clean, and that which should be clothed and warmed, these are facets of two of the great symbols which run throughout the play. They are not the only symbols, to be sure. They are not the most obvious symbols. Darkness and blood appear more often. But with a flexibility which must amaze the reader, the image of the garment and the image of the babe are so used as to encompass an astonishingly large area of the total situation. And between them, the naked babe, essential humanity, humanity stripped down to the naked thing itself, and yet as various as the future, and the various garbs which humanity assumes, the robes of honor, the hypocrite's disguise, the inhuman manliness with which Macbeth endeavors to cover up his essential humanity, between them, they furnish Shakespeare with his most subtle and ironically telling instruments.
Now, when we talk about literary criticism, we're asking, of course, about level 2, especially level 2, in our annotative approach. And to look at a text and try to understand how it works. Notice that what Brooks does here is he will build on much of what we have said already in our earlier conversations regarding Macbeth, but focusing specifically at 2b on issues of symbolism, especially two symbols. Although we could argue 3, but really he's going to focus on 2. The symbolism of children in the play, and the symbolism of plants and growing things, and then obviously the symbolism of clothing, or what we've called in our lectures the garment theme. Now these 3 symbols, of course, will play beautifully throughout the entire play. But I want to begin right at the start on page 386 by reviewing what it is that Brooks says that is foundational to understanding these symbols, namely that Macbeth as a character is caught between the irrational and the rational. Of course, this takes us all the way back to a very early motif from Homer's Odyssey, when Odysseus and his men have to find a way to go in between 2 monsters. You'll remember Scylla and Charybdis. They can't make it through without loss of life. Okay, Odysseus is told this by Tiresias. So he has to make a choice. In other words, between a rock and a hard place. And this is the origination of that idea. In other words, Macbeth is stuck between 2 really difficult choices, and he's not sure how he's supposed to behave or act. This best symbolized then by a child. Now, of course, we've already commented in other lectures that Macbeth 4:2 and Macduff's son, and the discussion between Macduff's son and his mother is the compelling scene, in my estimation, the compelling scene of the entire play, because it's here that we will join all of those major themes together. Of course, here Brooks is going to point out that Macbeth is struck. On the one hand, he wants the power. He wants to have the power. On the other hand, he recognizes that taking Duncan's life ultimately ruins his own. And so he's stuck between the rational and the irrational. He's stuck between what he wants and the way that he's going to have to get it, which totally destroys any sense of honor at all that Macbeth could have. Notice as well that there are other symbolisms that could be spoken of, and at the end of this cutting, we will have that information. Darkness and blood obviously appearing as powerful symbols, and we've spoken elsewhere about that. The beauty of Brooks's language is that on page 388, he is ready in paragraphs 7 and 8 to bring together the symbolism of children and the symbolism of growing things, plant symbolism. And he uses, notice, quotes directly from the play to give you a sense of how he can make these connections. And how do we define learning as more than really connecting new things to old things? So I want you to witness the way literary criticism here, brilliantly constructed, using internal validation and quoting. I want you to be able to do the same kind of thing in your own writing. Well, I hope that this is an essay for you that's challenged you. It's one you're going to have to go back and read a few more times to make sure you really fully appreciate it. Thank you.